Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's edition of the marketing webinar, which I've still not named. And I'm really excited, as I always am, because I have cool guests. And today I have one of the coolest in town. So let me introduce you immediately. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mike Sharman.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Mark, I have built you up in a big way. I've told everybody how interesting you are and not cuck boring you are. So please.
How many do we have on the call? How many people are on the webinar?
I have absolutely no clue. But actually what happens with these webinars is it's infinitely watched greater later.
Spoken like a true marketer.
Yeah.
Infinitely watched.
Infinitely.
Don't put a tangible value. Oh no, the marketing value of the marketing show that's yet to be named was infinitely greater than the previous episode. We were up 1,000% week on week.
Because we went from 4 to 8, I got you. 4 to 80.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mark, very quickly, how do you introduce yourself to the world when people don't know who the hell you are?
I like to say I'm Mike Sharman, and I'm co-founder of Retroviral, which is the agency that's made more brands go viral globally than any other agency in Africa. Like that's my business, my calling card.
I like that. So what I want to do is just make sure we are all officially live here. There we go. We've got a good morning.
Because the last time we did an interview, it just got lost in the ether of the internet. The Ethernet.
That was totally my fault. I won't lie. Well, yeah, mostly my fault. Mark, I asked you to come on today. I want to get straight into it because I've been trying to run this series to try help people decode better marketing. And the reason for it is quite simple. Last year, as we all profusely know, COVID hit. It scrambled everybody's brains. It scrambled the market fun. I come from a marketing background, as do you, and I've been saying for the longest time that already I think companies and their marketing strategies are dead average. At best, I'm being nice. But in 2021 and beyond, if people are really going to navigate this very difficult economy, they have to create value. They have to get their marketing strategies correct. And so I want to play the part that helps companies, people get this right. And so I started last week with my dad. We just spoke about some brief mistakes that we think companies make with their digital marketing strategy. But I wanted to bring you on today because not just tooting your horn, I think you have this exceptional talent and ability to make content go viral. We know that. But I think beyond that, you're an excellent storyteller. Why are you so good at it and why are other companies so crap? And am I right in saying that companies are crap at this?
I think there were a lot of comments within that build-up, and I think one of the important starting points is pandemic paralysis. So I think that so many brands went into safe, like batten down the hatches. We are going to get our marketing budget slashed because we're the first aspect to get cut when the CEO starts swinging the axe around at the balance sheet. And I think the reality is that we've had to evolve out of this space. And I'm busy working on a new book at the moment called Brandalism, which is basically taking the thinking of you as a brand, vandalizing it. If you had a can of spray paint, like that's what I want you to think about when it comes to your brand, your marketing teams, and say, let's reevaluate this. Let's take the picture that we knew because we know that that no longer exists. Let's vandalize it and let's pave a new path for our brand. Like our strategy is sound and we know exactly what it is. We know what our value prop is. We know where we stand from our USPs and all those like textbook things. But now how do we take that brand into a space that we can actually cut through the clutter? Because if you think about it, we were bombarded by so many messages last year, so many different messages saying the same thing. When are the vaccines coming? When is COVID coming to an end? When are we going to return to playing or attending sports matches? And these things haven't happened. These things haven't evolved. So I think it's incredibly important for brands to start taking a stand and also to start moving away from the safety net of planning, because we know that that was the old world planning. Now going into the evolution of where you're at and where you want to go. The growth of TikTok, the explosion during lockdown, the increase of dark social, WhatsApp, and the move to Telegram. I saw there were like 500 million actives off the change of the WhatsApp rules and regulations and T's and C's. Like people are moving into two extremes. There's the performance art of TikTok and the myriad of filters and actions that you can create. But then there's also the underbelly of dark social where people are sharing content, engaging in different interest groups, whether it be crypto or dog walking, yes. and those sorts of communities have exploded in these extremes. And I think that's what the exciting time now is. It's basically giving you a blank canvas to vandalize what you previously knew.
So do you think when you look at especially the bigger companies that they can reinvent themselves and move away from that top billing tone?
Hi, welcome to the marketing show with Mark Sham.
It's because Because, I mean, I just think about this as a marketer. It absolutely kills me. That's terrible. I'm the one who forgot to put my phone on silent.
They want to be on the show.
That will be on the show because we keep that unbelievable. That was terrible of me.
That was fantastic. What I think is that brands have always known the ways of doing things. They've done things in a particular way, and they've realized that if they don't evolve, then they die. Research shows that, if you look back to the 60s and 70s, the average S&P 500 company, they were 50, 60 years old, whereas now the average age is under 18 years. Yeah. So if you're going to last for only 18 years, I mean, that gives Facebook maybe another 4 or 5 years left before it no longer exists. Does it exist? I mean, 2.5 billion users. Do they just disappear overnight? We're already seeing a whole bunch of reporting around Instagram being on the downward curve. There's so much at play, and there's all these like monsters, monolithic companies that are controlling the media that we see and that we consume. So it's difficult for us to fathom a world without them, but it's a very true and likely reality that these things won't be around in the form that we know forever.
Look, I like to go back a step, but I've taken on a marketing style that scratches my own itch, right? I know as someone who consumes an enormous amount of content, uses the internet in broad ways, I want to talk to brands that are obviously first doing great things in the marketplace. My dad and I spoke about it last week. It's clearly there's no substitute for whatever it is that you do, product or service, has to be world class. But let's assume that it is, and you're continuing to iterate that process. Then I really want to talk to brands that they just are who they are. They're not trying to be something specific. They have like a very natural, authentic tone, but I don't want to feel like they are using authenticity as a strategy. Do you know what I mean? It's like that fine line. They're just doing what they're doing. And then besides that, I like to talk to brands that are storytellers, that can move along. So I try to create content in the same way. That's why I don't mind I mind my phone ringing, but I don't mind the fact that it's in there. It's just how it happens, right? I don't care. You have managed to, over the years, over and over and over, send or create content that went viral. Do you want to maybe give me a synopsis of your base thought process? How you seem to, because it's campaign after campaign, you seem to get it right. What are you doing differently that other companies aren't or other creators aren't?
I think the word that I like to use often is obsession. So there's an obsession around content, around storytelling, around performance. Like for me, in my heart, like I love getting up on stage. Like you, I miss the time when we could present to an audience full of real people. I also love being able to public speak. And along with that comes the obsession with loving key shows that talk to my interests on the likes of Netflix, Showmax, whatever your platform of choice is. And because I consume a lot of content across multiple touch points, whether it be via WhatsApp videos that get sent as memes or YouTube, you're always exposed to a lot of content. So I think relevance is incredibly important because once you have relevance, you have the ability to tap into a network effect. But if you take one step further back, even more. I did an acting course in Hollywood once, and the whole thing around the stand-up section of that course was all around a woman by the name of Judy Carter. She wrote this book called The Comedy Bible. Great book, you can get it on Amazon. And her whole thing started out with comedy to write a really good observational comedy, the type of stuff you see Trevor Noah delivering, the stuff if you like Jerry Seinfeld, if you like Chris Rock, that kind of stuff is all based on a premise. And the premise is the truth, and that's the kernel of connectivity if you think about your audience that you're presenting to. And the thing about premises is that you can talk about everything from rap to walking puppies, but there's a whole bunch of truth within each of these things that an audience, whether they like rap or walking puppies, that they nod their heads because they know it's true. And from there, the truth is the one thing that brings everyone together, and then it's the crafting of the act out, the funny, the delivery that brings the joy to life and brings the goosebumps and brings the humor through in that. So there is a science around writing really good content. There is the idea to leverage relevant and topical issues. And I think if we go back specifically to what happened with Creepy Crawly last year, like we had a really tough year collectively as a species. And sitting at home, I finally got a little schwal moment. I mean, you probably get this every time you go down to Cape Town and you make an Insta story on the promenade. You are one of those guys that just wants to throw off your kit and go and swim with the octopuses. What is the collective plural for octopus? Anyway, I digress. So when we had the opportunity to see this beautiful documentary of my octopus teacher, at first it was like, that is beautiful. Look at this, man and nature, the juxtaposition of being under the kelp. It was an incredible thing. And I was watching and I was like enjoying this. And my wife and my mother-in-law were so cynical about it. They were like, dude, if you ever get to a stage in your life where you need to leave us as your family and go and swim with an octopus to get away from us, we're going to feel very offended. And these kinds of conversations started. And for me, the ideas and connecting dots happen in strange places, but generally it's in the downtime. So it's like riding my bike or going for a spin or having a swim, not with octopuses, by the way. They don't have them at my Virgin Active. But bringing these things together, that's when the dots start being connected in my head. And I had this moment of clarity, like, wouldn't it be funny if we had a spoof of my octopus teacher? Because when you look at the stats, it was like within the top 10 documentaries on Netflix last year. Netflix keeps their figures very close to their chests. But if you think about all the crazy docus that were on last year, Last Dance, Tiger King, and my octopus teacher was in the top 10 of that content. Like, that's an incredible feat. And, Craig Foster and his team, they're doing incredible things. And what I thought was like, this is calling for parody. And for me, I heard a podcast last year, I think it's Tim Ferriss. I keep giving Tim Ferriss this quote, so if it's not, I apologize. But he said, your network is your net worth. Yes. And for me, like, my superpower has always been connecting the dots, picking up my phone, being able to DM someone, call them, tweet them, etc., and just say, like, I'm thinking about putting these things together. I spoke to Glenn Biederman Pam, who's a comedian, and we've done some work together over the last few years. And I said to Glenn, listen, we have to parody this thing. And he'd been in some content with me prior in the year, and we just started rolling. And Creepy Crawly was an obvious choice because the Creepy Crawly and the way it moves, and as kids, you always had this nostalgia around it. And interestingly enough, 6 years prior, Glenn and Jason Goliath, when they were just breaking through into the mainstream with their comedy, they'd been the stars of a spoof that we made of almost like a South African crocodile hunter. Jason was the Creepy Crawly hunter, and he had dreams and visions of hunting these things out of people's pools. And Glenn, obvious choice. And we just started bouncing notes backwards and forwards. Glenn then started sending voice notes. It's just majestic. And all these, and I was in absolute hysterics, and I was like, he's absolutely nailed it. And backwards and forwards with Creepy Crawly, having worked with them before, we had a contact, sent them the trailer for my octopus teacher. They then was like, what's my octopus teacher? And then, you kind of have those moments. And then eventually said, we want to have this spoof, just believe in us, we've got to be brave, because people bang on about marketers needing to be brave. But what does brave actually mean? And in this instance, sometimes it's like not knowing what the results are going to be, but having the relationship, the rapport, the gut feel from the cell of the agency or the storyteller to bring this to life. And within 96 hours, we had pitched scripts, we had pitched trailers, we had pitched WhatsApp voice notes, and we'd produced this piece of content down in Cape Town, and it was just so magical. And the rest just exploded, and it took on a life of its own. There was a whole bunch of spread. I mean, I've never worked on a campaign where I've received my own piece of content at least 4 or 5 times via separate WhatsApp groups. And I think that's a true indication of success. And it's difficult when it goes dark because you don't necessarily know the reach. But the second layer was when people started posting to Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and you could start seeing those numbers climbing. And we use a mixture of reporting software tools where we can see people liking content and sharing and engaging. But I personally would sit and watch all those hearts accumulating and ticking over on the content. And every time I saw there was a new journalist or an influencer liking it, I would send them a private message. And I would say, do you want to run a story on this? There was a deputy editor of Beeld. She liked it. And I was like, hey, I saw you liked the content. We'd love to do an interview with you. Our friend Brent Lindeque, he broke the story. I said, yo, Brent, we were involved in this. These are the credits. These are the people that were involved. And from there, we started proactively approaching people who were posting it to say, like, this was actually created for a brand. Got into like 702E, and it just started spiraling from there. And I think, for me, it was these situations, they are like the tsunamis of virality where you've got to jump, pick up a boogie board or a board, whatever you've got, and you've just got to ride that wave. And for me, it's like going into this place where you just absolutely zero in on everyone commenting about it, and those that are relevant, those who have access to media channels, you then target them and say, listen, we're involved, can we do an interview, can we speak to your deputy editor, can we speak to your reporter?
Yes.
And you physically get involved in the conversation from the people who have the ability to talk from one to many.
You created world-class content. And so I want to just pause you there for a second. Two things. So there's a whole bunch of things that I want to get back to you on there, because it shows for me that it's much more starting with the desire to break out and then disconnecting from the outcome. It seems to me, without question, that most companies are so parate in their approach in the market. They're so scared. So what's happened in general, the way I'm picking it up, and correct me if I'm wrong, is they've become so vanilla because they're so scared to trouble the waters in any way, and so you just become incoherent to the masses. You're just vanilla. You just kind of fade away. Whereas what's happening here with you every time, because it's interesting that you got Creepy Crawly to buckle so quickly, but obviously you have a relationship with these people and you have a track record. And I'm wondering, can companies finally get over their own hurdle so that they can have this thinking internally and go for it? It just seems to me it's a mentality and a mindset more than anything. You obviously then after that need to actually come up with the world-class content, but you also have to do it in such a way that you're not scared to be wrong, or you disconnect from the outcome. In other words, you're throwing a dart at the dartboard, it might hit, it might miss, and both are okay. But it seems to me that companies are too scared to throw the dart at the dartboard in case they miss.
Well, I think it's more conditioning around how the process was designed in a traditional agency setting. So your creative agency would develop your piece of content, but then they wouldn't be involved in taking it through the journey. They would hand over to a media agency who would then have a media plan, buying schedule, distribution. Then PR is a separate entity. So the problem there is that not one party is invested in the through-the-line dissemination of that content.
Yes.
It's almost like a viewer's journey or an audience journey, taking it from the way that it was envisaged to being in front of the eyeballs of the people that you wanted it to be seen by. And I think that's where we've always positioned ourselves differently in this almost hybrid thinking. So for me, I always bang on about the holy trinity of marketing. So it's digital, it's PR, and it's activation. So these things have to work in coordination with one another in order to be able to hit those heights that are able to be achieved. So for me, everything starts with remarkable content. Your content has to be remarkable. So it doesn't have to be a video. You can be PwC with a really intellectual white paper around the growth and the future of internet penetration around the African continent. Their outlook on digital media, for me, is always a valuable resource as a marketer once a year. That's something that I look forward to and get excited about. But when it comes to consumer content, is it remarkable in the storytelling or the humor or the duration of that content, and does it land the delivery? If you don't have the remarkable content, you'll struggle with the next few parts in that journey. But once you've got that remarkable content, developing the distribution plan, you've got paid, earned, shared, and owned. And that means what sits on your own channels, your website or your social, what goes out to journalists as a PR and earned media. How do you potentially work with influencers, whether they are paid or they just love your content and they can act as distribution vehicles for you. So everything within that distribution process is a scientific dissemination idea and concept, but both sides aren't always given the appropriate hustle that they need to go viral. And that's why I always say virality is science-based.
And I believe you, especially because you've managed to replicate it over and over and over. Okay, so guys, two things. Whenever I come into this part of the show, I want to just let you know about some things that are happening here. I've had to get off my high horse. The first thing that I want you to know is my dear partner. He's the guy behind the scenes right now who's actually producing this for me. I'm going to publish a little webinar that he's doing on Thursday. He really does have his masters in the idea of TV formats in presentation. So this is a free webinar that you guys can sign up for. It's come onto your screen right now. Go check it out. Like I said, register for free. It's recorded, so if you can't make the 4th of Feb at 6 p.m., you can watch the recording. That's my dear partner. And again, the whole idea is to continually add value from this. I'm going to give you guys another 10 or 15 seconds to just click on that button. I'll send you an email about this afterwards, and then we can kind of get on with it. All right, you got your timer and I'm removing it. Okay, Mark, I am absolutely loving. You guys, just before we carry on, I've just got my machine here, just having a look. You're welcome to keep questions coming. We are going to do a Q&A in about 10 minutes or so, and then Mark and I will attack your Q&A. So send them on, I'll have a look, and we can do it. So you're talking about virality as a science. I would love for you to, and you started already talking about the Holy Trinity of marketing. So I'd love for you to carry on in that vein. What I'm trying to do with just this simple half an hour is try to give as many people on the other end as much bang for their buck, because we're trying to create relationships with these people. And it's something that I went on ad nauseum last week in the mistakes with marketing, is that in a sense, it's not actually that complicated. And not every single piece of content that you post has to be world-class and shoot through the roof. It's this consistent practice of just trying to create value for people through your content. To your point, you use the creepy crawly example being consumer-facing. And then, very thankfully, you use the PwC one, which is much more B2B-facing. And so it's exactly that. I think injecting humor and storytelling, all of these things, it's obvious to me, but I just don't see that many brands doing it. Am I assessing correctly? When I look around at general brands, be it consumer or B2B, it just seems so shit. I look at the average marketing and I'm like, it's so underwhelming to me. Do you agree? And if so, what are your tips in the next while to counteract that?
The challenge is humor is really difficult to land, especially in a country where you have so many languages, you have so many cultures, you have so many nuances. Humor can be really difficult, and I think that's where sometimes humor is forced. But if you go back to those Judy Carter thinking around what is that premise or insight that will get everyone in the room nodding their head, whether they are of a certain culture, religion, background, or interest. And I think that's where so many marketers go wrong. They try and overcomplicate things. They try and force the funny. And when you're forcing the funny, it ends up falling flat. The other technique is to use emotion and to use drama. So if you think about financial services in particular, you don't necessarily want your bank or your unit trust to start being humorous about content, because you want to feel safe that your tiny disposable bit of income is going to a space where someone isn't going to just run away and take bags of money with them, that they actually are caring about you, your future, and your children. And that's why those drivers, from an emotional point of view, are sometimes a lot easier to manipulate, because it's soundtrack, it's music, it's around a feeling, a mood with the lighting and how the director of photography has brought that to life with the director. So I think that when you think about Alan Gray, when you think about the Sanlams of the world, Sanlam obviously came out with some humor about South Africans and how we're a different, it's like one-of-a-kind offering for a one-of-a-kind country. And I think that humor is a very fine line, and so many people get it wrong. And that's why you are only able to really remember a few standout cases and a few brands that really own humor in South Africa. But humor isn't necessarily very difficult. You have to follow that textbook rule of KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Since it's Valentine's month, it's a relevant kind of mention. But I think that, there is so much more opportunity with humor. We are really funny people. We've got such ability to laugh at ourselves. And I'd love to see more brands giving it a crack. But like you mentioned earlier, sometimes they dip their toe in, but you almost have to go all in. Creating a piece of content, think about movies. Think about every blockbuster that comes out. That's a startup in itself, right?
Yes.
And think about the fact that it uses snippets of that content to sell itself. The trailer, the preview, there's a whole ecosystem. There's posters. There's a whole team of people pushing that movie. There's the junkets that happen with the actors. So a piece of content as a movie can make $1 billion. It can make a few $1 billion. And that's what so many of these large studios are riding on. So if you take that thinking that your piece of content is a business, and you go down to a micro level that your piece of content is a representation of your business, how can it give your business the ultimate taste of its personality so that other people emotionally connect and then go down the sales funnel to make the rational decision of purchasing your product?
I love that. So could I be as bold to ask you maybe about some examples of brands that you think have done it really well?
Brands that have done it really well, I mean, obviously the one that jumps to mind is obviously Nando's. I mean, their latest poster today, talks to the vaccine in particular.
Yes, they nailed it.
And for those of you who haven't seen it, is that, the government doesn't want to put chips in you, but we do. So that's basically like their little push at selling some fries. And I just love the humor on that. And that's a perfect example. Nando's didn't just get that right overnight. I mean, I had the privilege of working with the brand for 10 years, between 2010 and 2013. But this is a strategy that now is like 15 years old. Before social media, those one-liners were going and being published in the newspaper. So it's just, that's an important way. Is like you almost have to find a tactic, you have to find a delivery, and it takes years or even decades to get that right. So we know that that's always a great result. I've spoken about one or two financial services brands. I think if you look at the likes of Coronation even, or Prudential, they talk about consistency and they talk about saving. The problem is within each of these categories, it starts becoming a little bit muddied. So if you think about a Coronation ad, you could be thinking about a Prudential, you could be thinking about an Allen Gray. So many of them start selling a very similar construct.
Yes.
You think a few years back to alcohol advertising, there was an Idris Elba Amstel, there was a Jamie Foxx Odomester, and once again, because you've got these really powerful characters, these leading men, you then start almost in your head, you start forgetting which one was representing which brand. So ultimately, yes, you want your audience and your target market in those instances to feel like an Idris, to feel like a Jamie Foxx, but you can also run the risk of losing them to other categories, whether it be beer or whiskey, because that aspiration has been sold across categories.
Can that be fixed by the more regular content that goes out daily, like for example via social? Because one of the things I've seen is, if I even use my own channels, so I'm a speaker and we host in a marketer, but I'll write about anything from resting to thought leadership on any, you name it. But it's that regularity where a lot of the feedback I get from people, it's not just that one or two big campaigns, which are helpful. Like people remember that I spoke about the ANC, but since then, that's not necessarily what I'm renowned for, because there's this almost every day, every second day content that goes out that's totally written for the person on the other side. It's not written about me, it's written for them. And so I feel like that helps me distinguish quite significantly between maybe myself and someone else who's in my position. So would I be right in saying you want to have both? You want to have those big campaigns that go out and are intensive, and then the same principle should apply to your more regular, smaller, ongoing content?
Yeah, I think it also depends on budgets. So a lot of brands don't necessarily have big budgets, so they have to be smarter with how they play that spend. But always on content, to your point, it allows you to understand the headspace of where your consumer's at and what they like. So you've spoken about everything from politics to thought leadership. We as customers and as human beings, we have multiple interests. We may not want to be focused on politics all the time. We may want to be more finance focused, but ultimately, like you said, always on allows you to tap into various insights and see what resonates with your audience. Maybe the political mention falls flat because you aren't a Nando's. Maybe it needs to be more highbrow, maybe it needs to be more finance based. And then when it comes to like those larger campaigns, a lot of the times a good brief determines what that campaign needs to be. So what is your business problem that you have and how are you trying to solve it? So many brands, they know that sales is an issue. They have to enhance or amplify their sales, but what specifically are you selling? Is there a product that you can zero in on? Is there something that you can focus on? And that's why it goes back to focus. It goes back to insights, because ultimately you want to spend your marketing buck on what's going to give you the best return on that spend. So if you know that you can spend R1 million to generate a 10 million rand return, then those are the kinds of things that you're going to follow. But remember, your agency partners, your internal comms team, they can only be as good as the information you provide them. The more arrow focused you can be around what you're trying to achieve, the better, because it's easy to develop and determine awareness. Awareness isn't a problem for a lot of brands. It's the conversion. And especially in these markets where we are under a lot of pressure, and the pie of disposable income is a lot more reduced than it has been over the last few years. You have to be incredibly targeted with how you communicate with your relevant audience who's going to bring the biggest returns.
So my hope is that with COVID, and again, it's been spoken about ad nauseum, but I'm hoping that part of the shift that it's brought about with it is that it has indeed rattled all businesses of all sizes from their traditional thinking and shaken everybody up and kind of said, okay, and it's not that you have to go take everything you've ever done and throw it away, but go, okay, let's keep with what's working, but really let's be more adventurous. Let's be more experimenting. Let's not be so attached to the outcome because people have short memories. I feel like companies are so scared. They're so inwardly focused about what will happen if they miss. And I've found that you can't actually miss that bad if you start with a great intention. Do you know what I mean? Unless you're absolutely tone deaf. You take a stab at something and you miss. If you're trying to mock something, bring other people down indirectly, that's where you see it often goes wrong. But I feel like brands, big and small, taking a bit of a stab at something, provided they're trying to uplift or do something cool, even if it misses, people remember it today and then 2 weeks later. You know, I'll never forget like when an article came out a few years ago about how Woolies were only hiring people of color. And there was this huge uproar. And I remember even the moment I was like, you go eat all the other lasagnas. I like Woolies lasagna. And you know, 2 weeks later, everybody was back to buying Woolies lasagna. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, even when it goes. Okay, so what I want to do is it's question time. So guys, I would love for you to keep questions coming. Just as I give you an occasion, won't you just go onto our screen there, partner? Just as we keep the Q&A going, I just want to give you a quick shout out. So what I've got is, it's actually been quite remarkable. The digital marketing workshop that I offer has actually filled up for next week, but I've got another one in exactly a month's time, 9 to 11 March. But I just thought I'd put it out there. I'm giving you a gap to get your Q&A ready. So when you guys are ready, I'm happy, more than happy to take some questions from you guys.
While the questions come in, I'll just add to your point around, you know, you said mocking people. And I think Glenn, with a lot of his interviews that he did around My Creepy Teacher, the fascinating thing was, and the insight of his comments, was that a good parody doesn't stand on anybody. It doesn't make them feel smaller than they are. It doesn't intend to belittle. And I think your point around intention is incredibly important because that wasn't built with any kind of malice to make Craig Foster feel less than he was.
Yes.
It just meant to juxtapose an inanimate object with this beautiful animate object that was the octopus. So it was almost like a replacement of the octopus as opposed to mocking the man. And in order to get the performance right and to make it remarkable, Glenn had to mimic the way in which Craig Foster spoke.
And you know, it's funny because you're obviously going to get a small group of people who don't get it. And I think as a brand and as an entity, you have to be okay with some people in the market telling you that they hate you and that they never want to deal with you again. Because by virtue of not being vanilla, by virtue of taking a stand, you invariably do push some people away. So I think someone who did it incredibly well was Narc. Or, you know, like for me, they've taken some really bold stands in the last while. And then a whole bunch of videos went up online of people burning their Narc merchandise and whatever. But they were clear from the beginning who they are, what they stand for, and they don't mind a bit of backlash because they strengthen that crowd of theirs. And even then, they weren't doing it to take a stab at someone else. They were trying to lift something up.
But I think also, you know, there's two examples. So Nike's a great example. If you've watched the Tiger documentary, whether you agree with it or not, even then when Tiger was almost graduating from amateur to pro, they put out one of their first print ads with Tiger when he was going to the Masters as a, you know, basically just a young man. And their statement in that ad was like a few years ago, he wouldn't have been able to play at Augusta because he was of color. And the fascinating thing was like, you don't know all of the journeys that Nike's been on, but now it's obviously it's a lot more in light because of social media. There's a lot more amplification. But you know, it's not a new strategy that Nike's employed.
No.
They've always lifted people up that were previously disadvantaged either by a set of rules or by, you know, some form of prejudice. And that's what I think they've stuck to their guns once again over the last 20, 30 years. When it comes to the likes of Gillette, you know, there are those research proposals and papers that have been done where they got hammered, where they were told, well, they were telling the market to be like a man or be the best you can be. And people were like, you're just taking advantage of a social movement without this being core and, to your word earlier, authentic.
Yes, I love that. So there's a few questions here. Diane asks, how does one make a difficult product or industry sexy to readers, especially when humor doesn't fit with it?
I mean, it would be great if, does she mention what the
She
category
doesn't. So
is?
you might have to give us there. And obviously these things are highly contextual.
Sure. So I think that it goes back to that earlier point around emotion. Not everything has to be humorous. Sometimes emotion is the thing that you want to sell. I mean, I don't know if anybody remembers, but a few years ago, there was a Dial Direct TV commercial called The Notebook. You can search it now and you'll find it. And interestingly enough, stars Julia, who is Suzelle DIY, who is Tully, and incredible. It just shows you the range of Julia as an actress and how great she is. She's the mom of this little boy in the story, and I'll let you have a look at it and check it out. But it is a beautiful story about this little boy is effectively doing chores so that he can save his mom time. And that was the insight from the brand, is like talking about how technology and how their product saves you time so that you can spend your time, that valuable thing, that object of your love for your family or spending time with your kids, like allow you to do more things that you want to do. And I think, going back to Diane's question, I think that's the kind of thing you want to tap into. You want to find that emotion that speaks to me as that mom, as that dad, and makes me feel like, geez, these guys really get me, because these little people in my life, they're important.
She's actually said you're plastic, but I guess to your point, what it is it's not about marketing plastic. It's about what it's going to do for you in the long run.
Yeah, and it's also, it goes back to the whole things around like value propositions. At the end of the day, what is Coke? It's literally just a red can with some brown liquid in it. Pepsi is a blue can with some brown liquid in it. But the fact is that Coke exemplifies, and my friend Dean Ulsh always loves banging on about it, open happiness. Such a beautiful line, because it makes you feel like once you open this thing, it's going to unleash not a Pandora's box, but an actual happiness factory.
Yes.
So yeah, plastic for Diane. Also great Netflix show at the time that I'm busy watching, season 2 of Blown Away. I think it's called Blown Away. It's all about glass blowers, and they're in this thing. So it's not plastic, but just the craft of creating these amazing art sculptures out of glass. Anyway, I digress.
No, well, that's what you do for a living, my angel pie. You digress. I'm having a look at this. Delilah asks a question, because there aren't that many. I think I've learned this with a lot of speakers who really are intensive and enthusiastic.
You want to make me feel better?
I'm not. No, I'm being, because I'll tell you who I watch this with at even my own events. Rich Mulholland. Yeah. He's so intense on stage that when it comes time for like tweets, there's no tweets, because what would you be doing? You're sitting going, I must be honest, the more engaging a speaker is for me, the less time I have to get onto my phone and tweet about what they're saying. I'm just sitting there gung-ho listening. So, okay, Delilah, what are the marketing strategy differences or similarities for services versus product, is there, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think the thing with strategy, once again, it goes back to keeping it simple. So if you can really start at the bottom in terms of assuming that you have no information. So what is your target market? What does your product or service do? It's all about asking those questions. It's almost like being a marketing journalist hybrid at the start of that. And some of the best strategies that I've seen written is really just asking questions about, what is the industry doing? What are my competitors doing? And you'll end up going down a rabbit hole of really finding interesting insights around your category. And once you can figure out what your category is, that's when it solves a lot of problems. The thing with services in particular, I love Danny Meyer from Shake Shack, because he's obviously famous for Shake Shack, but there's an incredible Masters of Scale episode. It's a podcast that Reid Hoffman, founder of LinkedIn, hosts. So that I listen to a lot of those podcasts in hard lockdown, and Reid interviews some of the most memorable, some of the most remarkable brands, everything from NGOs to commercial brands. And the discussion around Danny Meyer is really around how he bangs on about enlightened hospitality. And it's a phrase that came up in a discussion the other day with someone who is also a consultant. And the thing about enlightened hospitality, you can really use people within a service business to make you feel special and make you want to keep using this over and over again. Why do you go to Naked Coffee when you're down in Cape Town? Because they make you feel special. Whether you're sitting here in Morningside or whether you're down in Cape Town, there's something about the service of those people that make you feel like a regular. It makes you feel like you're local. And that's something that we've lost in this age of digitization. It's like, I want to feel like a local. I want people to know my name when I walk in. And Orange Theory Fitness is a growing gym that is all about high intensity intensity, exploding across the States. Their thing is, as you walk in, you have to greet every member. As a member of staff at Orange Theory, you have to learn every one of the members that come through that door. So if any kind of engagement, hey Mark, how's it going? How's your workout? Rowing hard today? Great. That makes you feel so warm and fuzzy. I mean, you at the gym all the time.
Yeah.
Imagine someone came and remembered your name.
You're spot on.
It feels so special.
Okay, last question, and then I'm going to kind of let you close off with your parting thoughts. So, it's a simple one, but I think it's great. Jonathan Campbell says, do you think that South Africans have become too sensitive and take offense to humor?
I think the challenge is that the world as a whole has looked at things in a lot more microscopic detail. I mean, the reality is that we all have to be mindful of what we say, how we communicate, and the fact that we are saying things that may have been prejudiced to someone in the past. There's also, like, nowadays there's a lot more freedom to be yourself and have the ability to own whatever your thing is. I think the reality, you spoke about tone deaf earlier. I think it's possible to deliver a piece of content that can be funny, can be a little zany. Like you said, it's going to alienate someone at some stage, because one brand can't be all things to all people. So if you are a brand, if your target market is women who are based in Joburg, 21 to 25, you're going to alienate men. And that's the reality. And your product's not for men. So that's not a big deal. Men don't have to be invited to the conversation. We work with Lilette's. Like, it's a product for women. It's not necessarily going to appeal to a man, the communication. And that's fine, because that's what your product does. Anyway, so to Jonathan's point, there are going to be times when you run the risk of offending people, but it's always important to test your idea with a group of people that are going to be impacted by that communication. Yes. I'm in a very fortunate position of having a business of people of all shapes, all backgrounds, all colors, all sizes. And we will test things, and we'll bounce off our work WhatsApp group. What do you think about this? Generally at the iterative stage, before it's been produced and ready to go out. Because once it's been produced, you're more likely to actually just, not listen to the caution, and you're going to just go out. And that can also be a problem. But if you can bounce the idea and see, you'll open yourself to the ability to understand, is this offensive to somebody? Because sometimes we white privileged men, and we live in an echo chamber, and we don't always know if we say something is going to be offensive. So you have to sound test it. An interesting point to go back to comedy, and possibly to wrap this all up, is that some of the best comedians in the world, they write in writing groups. So they bounce your content off one another and see how it lands. Because you don't want to just be testing it when you go on the stage, because every idea just born out of your own imagination is perfect. It hasn't had the opportunity to be dented. And if you look at someone like Trevor Noah, he's got a writing team of 20 plus people for a lot of the gags and the sketches that they develop for The Daily Show. And it's not because he's incompetent, it's because comedy is written so much better in groups. If you look at a lot of agencies in South Africa, under pressure, margins, resourcing. So many young copywriters are being thrown to the wolves to write that script when they don't necessarily have, one, the experience, and two, the team around them to actually bounce and shoot things down. And it's an important space where negativity can be important, because those negative comments or the hate about it in a safe space ultimately will refine that idea to be forged in fire and viral awesomeness.
Mark, I really want to just say thank you so much for being here. So that's your close-up over there. And what I'd love to do is, as we close off, I'd love to leave you with the last word from a content perspective, and then I'll close off the show. So off you go.
As always, folks, it's one simple phrase. Life is short, play naked.
Mark, I really do love you so much, and I hope that we get to do this a little bit more often. At least now this has gone live, and I believe Nico has this recorded.
Jeez,
so this will be going on
double
social
whammy.
Media. So now there'll be no excuses when in a few hours I even put this up on Facebook. God bless the world.
Technology at its finest.
I really want to just give you guys all a little bit of love, and thank you for being part of this. Even for us, it's just an experiment. And I see we had about 100 people attend today, which I'm pretty happy with. But I really do love the idea, because I push it quite a bit afterwards. I wasn't joking. And, I really am just trying to equally become that person that is trying to create content that helps people on whatever end. In this end, I come from a marketing background. I have access to people like you. I should use that to help people. Our strategy is very simple and very clear. We believe in jab, 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 right hook. So I'm not scared of making sales, and I don't think you should be either. If your product and service is world class, you are actually doing someone on the other end a favor by offering to solve a problem of theirs. We shouldn't shy away from making sales. We should just do it in what I believe should be an elegant way. So I want to say thank you for being part of this experiment with me. Thank you for watching this. If you got value, please help me share it along. Like I said to you, I've got my own digital marketing workshop where we really take these things, how to create webinars, how to really get the base of the strategy absolutely correct. It's not what today is about, but I think it is important to know that if you want more detail, it's there. So from me, Mark, thank you so much for being part of this. Guys, we will chat to you next week, same time, same place, where I have Mark Stopforth in studio talking about who knows what. See you next week. I'm getting off my high horse to end.